Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we are going to be looking at some really interesting research that just came out of the University of Delaware.
Oh yeah, this one is really cool.
It's an article from March 12, 2025, and the title of it is Scientists Discover Key Genes That Could Revolutionize Obesity Treatment. So obviously, this is a huge topic.
Yeah.
And we're going to be diving deep into this article and figuring out what's really going on here.
This is a fascinating study because it really, dives into those molecular mechanisms behind obesity.
Yeah.
It's not just, the simple calories in, calories out.
Right. And we're all familiar with, the statistics about how over 40% of Americans are obese.
Mm-hmm.
And, that leads to a lot of other problems, increases your risk for all kinds of diseases.
Oh, absolutely.
So what is it about this research that makes it so different than everything else we've heard about?
Well, for one thing, it challenges the traditional view of fat.
Okay.
We often think of fat as just like this passive storage for excess calories. It's just kind of sitting there.
Yeah, it's like a blob.
But this research highlights its role as an active endocrine organ.
Huh. Okay. So it's not just a blob. It's actually like an organ.
Yeah. It's producing hormones and influencing all sorts of metabolic processes throughout the body.
Wow. Okay. So how did the researchers at the University of Delaware actually study this?
Well, they used an animal model. One group of mice was fed a high-fat diet.
Oh, so like the typical Western diet we always hear about.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what they were mimicking. And the other group stuck to a standard chow diet for over a year.
Okay. So they're looking at the long-term effects here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not just a quick snapshot in time.
Yeah. And what they found was astonishing.
Okay. Lay it on me.
There was a huge difference in how genes were expressed in the fat tissue between those two groups.
So wait, are you saying that the food these mice were eating was actually changing how their genes were behaving?
Absolutely.
Wow.
The high-fat diet led to significant changes in the activity of hundreds of genes in the fat tissue.
Compared to the standard diet?
Yeah.
Wow, that's wild.
This really highlights the profound impact our diet can have on our genes. Especially the genes related to how our bodies process and store fat.
Yeah, and that's where I start to feel a little personally attacked because,
Right.
Thinking about my own diet and how that's affecting my genes.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that not all fat is created equal.
Right.
So what did this research reveal about the different types of fat?
That's a great point. We have two main types of fat. We have visceral fat, which surrounds our organs.
Right.
And is considered, the more dangerous type.
The dangerous belly fat.
Exactly. And then we have subcutaneous fat, which sits just beneath the skin.
Right.
Now, what's really interesting is that the study found almost twice as many differentially expressed genes in the visceral fat compared to the subcutaneous fat.
Oh, wow.
Think about this. In the high-fat diet group, over 700 genes were acting differently in the visceral fat, while only around 300 were changed in the subcutaneous fat. Oh, wow. So that's a really big difference.
It is a huge difference.
Why is that so significant?
Well, you see, visceral fat is much more metabolically active.
Okay.
It's not just sitting there. It's pumping out inflammatory molecules that can wreak havoc on your system. It increases the risk for all sorts of metabolic diseases like heart disease and type 2 diabetes.
So it's the visceral fat that's really causing all these problems.
Yeah, it's a major contributor.
Okay, so understanding how genes are behaving differently in that visceral fat that could be the key to finding more targeted treatments.
Exactly, and that's what makes this research so exciting. They were able to pinpoint 4 specific genes.
Oh.
Let's just call them the Fantastic Four for now.
I love it.
That seemed to play a crucial role in how our bodies respond to a high-fat diet.
Especially within the visceral fat.
Especially in the visceral fat, that's right.
Okay, I am so intrigued. Tell me more about these Fantastic Four genes. What makes them so special?
Well, these genes are involved in some pretty key functions in our bodies.
Metabolism, calcium handling, and inflammation.
Correct.
And by understanding how they're affected by diet, we might be able to develop treatments that target these genes specifically, leading to healthier fat tissue and potentially even preventing or reversing obesity.
So instead of just focusing on, counting calories or exercising more, we could be looking at ways to manipulate these genes directly.
Exactly. It's a whole new frontier in obesity treatment.
Wow, this is amazing. Okay, so how did they even find these genes?
Well, they found these genes by analyzing a massive amount of genetic data using a technique called RNA sequencing.
RNA sequencing. Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down for me because that sounds really complex.
So think of it this way. Imagine you have a giant recipe book.
Okay.
And that book represents your DNA It contains all the instructions for building and running your body.
Got it.
Now, RNA sequencing is like taking a snapshot of which recipes are actually being used in the kitchen at a specific moment. It tells us which genes are turned on and actively producing proteins that carry out specific tasks in the cells.
So they basically used this RNA sequencing to see which genes were cooking up trouble in the fat cells of those mice on that high-fat diet.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. And then they used bioinformatics, which is like having a super smart chef who can analyze all those active recipes and identify the ones that are most likely contributing to the problem of obesity.
And that chef led them to the Fantastic Four.
Exactly.
This is incredible.
It really is. And this is just the beginning. You know, the researchers are now taking their findings a step further by studying gene expression in human adipose tissue.
Oh, wow. So they're moving from mice to humans.
Yes. They're going to see if these same genes are at play in people.
That's huge.
It is.
That's a big step towards developing potential treatments.
Absolutely.
So what else are they looking at?
Well, they're also exploring the possibility that there might be sex differences in how obesity affects gene expression. You know, men and women often experience obesity differently.
Right.
And understanding these nuances is essential for developing truly personalized treatments.
That makes sense. Tailoring treatments based on individual genetic makeup and sex could be a real game changer.
It could revolutionize how we approach obesity.
Okay, before we dive into that, let's take a closer look at how they actually found these Fantastic Four genes.
Yeah.
We know they used RNA sequencing.
Right.
But what exactly does that involve?
RNA sequencing is like taking a detailed inventory of all the active genes in a cell.
Okay.
It allows scientists to measure the activity of thousands of genes simultaneously.
Wow.
Giving them a really comprehensive picture of what's going on at the molecular level.
So it's not just about looking for one specific gene. It's about analyzing this huge amount of data.
Right.
To see which genes are working together.
Exactly. It's like piecing together a giant puzzle.
Oh, wow.
And that's where bioinformatics comes in. It's essentially using powerful computer programs to analyze all that data, looking for patterns and connections that reveal which genes are the key players in obesity.
So it's like having a super smart detective who can sift through mountains of evidence and find the crucial clues.
Exactly.
This is really amazing.
It is.
So what's the biggest takeaway for our listeners so far? What should they be excited about when it comes to this research?
I think the biggest takeaway is that this research is giving us a whole new understanding of how fat works at a molecular level.
Okay.
It shows that specific genes play a crucial role in how our bodies respond to diet and how fat tissue contributes to obesity and related diseases.
So this means that we could be on the verge of more personalized and effective obesity treatments.
Absolutely. By targeting these specific genes, we might be able to develop therapies that help people lose weight, improve their metabolic health, and reduce their risk of developing serious conditions like diabetes and heart disease.
So it's not just about treating obesity after it develops.
Right.
This research could also have implications for prevention.
Absolutely. If we can identify the genes that make people more susceptible to obesity, we could potentially intervene early on.
Oh, wow.
Maybe even in childhood.
Yeah.
To help them make healthier choices and reduce their risk.
That's a really powerful thought. Imagine a world where we can prevent obesity from developing in the first place.
I know, it's exciting to think about.
Okay, this deep dive has definitely got my brain buzzing. I want to hear more about those individual genes, the Fantastic Four.
Right.
And what they actually do in our bodies.
Yeah.
But we'll have to save that for next time.
Yes, definitely more to come.
All right, we'll be back soon with part 2 of our deep dive into this incredible research, so don't go anywhere.
Welcome back. You know, it's remarkable to think that we're moving from this broad understanding of obesity to pinpointing specific genes that could be driving it.
Right. It's not just about willpower or making better choices. There's the whole genetic component at play here, and you were about to tell us more about these Fantastic Four genes that the research highlighted. Yeah. What can you tell us about them individually?
Well, each of these genes plays a distinct role in our bodies, and they all seem to be influenced by that high-fat diet in the study.
Okay. I'm ready to hear about these genetic superstars.
All right, let's start with gene number 1.
Okay.
This gene is heavily involved in metabolism. Think of it as the control panel for how your body processes and uses energy.
Okay.
In the mice that were fed the high-fat diet, this gene's activity was significantly altered, suggesting that it could be a key player in how efficiently the body burns calories.
So if this gene isn't working properly, it could make it harder to lose weight even if you're eating less and exercising.
That's the idea. This gene could be a major factor in why some people struggle with weight loss more than others, even when they're putting in the effort.
That's really interesting. Okay, what about gene number 2?
Now, this one is all about calcium handling.
Okay.
Calcium is essential for a whole host of bodily functions, including muscle contraction, nerve signaling, but it also plays a role in how our fat cells develop and function.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So how does this gene relate to obesity?
Well, the research found that the high-fat diet disrupted this gene's activity in the visceral fat, potentially interfering with calcium regulation in those cells.
Yeah.
And this could have downstream effects on how fat is stored and metabolized.
Okay, so this gene might be influencing how our bodies store fat and how effectively we can break it down.
Oh, yeah.
It's 2 genes down. What about the other 2 members of the Fantastic Four?
All right, gene number 3. This one's a biggie. It's directly involved in inflammation.
Oh, yeah. That chronic low-grade inflammation that we hear so much about these days.
That's the one. And we know that chronic inflammation is linked to so many health problems, including obesity.
Yes.
And in the study, this gene's activity was significantly increased in the visceral fat of the mice who ate the high-fat diet.
So this gene could be making the visceral fat even more dangerous.
Exactly. It's like adding fuel to the fire.
Oh, no.
And finally, we have gene number 4. This gene plays a more indirect role, but it's still a crucial piece of the puzzle. It's involved in regulating the activity of other genes.
So it's like a master switch.
Kind of like a master switch, yeah. And the research found that this gene's activity was significantly altered in the high-fat diet group.
Interesting.
Suggesting that it could be playing a role in coordinating the overall response of fat tissue to an unhealthy diet.
So these Fantastic Four genes are like a team, each with its own unique ability, but they're all working together to influence how our bodies process fat and respond to our diet.
That's a great way to put it.
It's really mind-boggling to think about.
It is, and it highlights just how complex obesity truly is. It's not just about one single gene or one simple solution. It's a whole network of interactions happening at the molecular level.
And this research is giving us a glimpse into that complexity.
Yeah.
It's so exciting to think about the potential for developing treatments that could target these specific genes. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I'm curious, how do scientists even begin to study something as intricate as gene expression?
Well, that's where those powerful tools we mentioned earlier come into play, RNA sequencing and bioinformatics.
Right. We talked about RNA sequencing being like taking a snapshot of which genes are actively producing proteins in a cell. But can you explain a bit more about how that actually works?
Think of it this way. Your DNA is like a blueprint containing all the instructions for building a house, right? But not all of those instructions are being used at any given time.
Right.
RNA sequencing is like taking a peek into the construction site and seeing which parts of the blueprint are currently being followed.
I see.
It tells us which genes are turned on and actively guiding the production of specific proteins in the cells.
So they're essentially using this RNA sequencing to spy on the cells and see which genes are busy at work.
Exactly. And in the case of this study, they compared the active blueprints in the fat cells of mice that ate a high-fat diet to those that ate a standard diet.
And that's how they discovered those hundreds of genes that were behaving differently in the high-fat diet group.
That's right. And that's where bioinformatics comes in. It's like having a team of expert architects who can analyze all those blueprints and figure out which ones are most likely responsible for the structural problems in the house, or in this case, the metabolic problems in the body.
So bioinformatics is helping scientists make sense of this massive amount of genetic data and identify the key players in obesity.
Exactly. It's a crucial tool for deciphering the complex language of our genes.
This is truly groundbreaking stuff.
Yeah.
It feels like we're on the cusp of a whole new era in obesity treatment. One that's based on a deeper understanding of the interplay between our genes and our environment.
It is incredibly exciting. And the fact that they're now looking at these genes in human tissue is a huge step forward.
Right. We talked a lot about the potential for personalized medicine, but what does that actually look like in the context of obesity?
Right.
If they find these same genes are at play in humans, what kind of treatments could be developed?
We'll imagine a future where you could get a genetic test that tells you which of these Fantastic Four genes are particularly active in your body.
Okay, I'm picturing it. So you get this genetic test, and it reveals that, let's say, gene number 1, the one involved in metabolism, is working overtime in your body, making it harder for you to burn calories effectively.
Right.
Then what?
That's where the exciting possibilities of personalized medicine come in based on your specific genetic profile. Doctors could develop a treatment plan that targets that gene directly.
So maybe a medication that helps regulate that gene's activity and boosts your metabolism.
Exactly. Or perhaps a gene therapy approach that actually modifies the gene itself.
Whoa, gene therapy for obesity. That sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
It might sound futuristic, but it's becoming more and more of a reality, and that's just one example.
But hold on, wouldn't treatments like that be incredibly expensive? Would everyone have access to them?
That's a really important question, and it brings up the whole issue of healthcare equity. We need to ensure that any breakthroughs in personalized medicine are accessible to everyone, regardless of their income or background.
Absolutely. It would be a real tragedy if these amazing discoveries only benefited a select few. But I have to say, just the thought of having treatments that are tailored to our individual genetic makeup is incredibly hopeful.
It is, and this research is just the beginning. There's still so much to learn about the complex interplay between our genes and obesity.
Right. And we can't forget about the importance of lifestyle factors like diet and exercise.
Absolutely. Personalized medicine is not a magic bullet. It's about taking a holistic approach to health, understanding our individual predispositions, and making informed choices that support our well-being.
This deep dive has given me so much to think about, both about the science itself and the broader implications for society.
It's a reminder that scientific progress often raises as many questions as it answers, but that's what makes it so fascinating.
Okay, before we move on to part 3, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the possibility of sex differences in how obesity affects gene expression. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Of course. For a long time, medical research was primarily conducted on men.
Right.
And the findings were often assumed to apply equally to women.
It was this one-size-fits-all approach to medicine.
Exactly. But we now know that there are significant biological differences between men and women that can influence how they respond to diseases and treatments.
So in the context of obesity, could there be different Fantastic Four genes at play in men and women?
That's a possibility, and that's why the researchers are specifically looking at potential sex differences in how these genes are expressed in human adipose tissue.
That's really important. It means that future treatments could be even more personalized, taking into account not just your individual genes, but also your sex.
Precisely, and that's the beauty of personalized medicine. It recognizes that we're all unique, and that our healthcare should reflect that individuality.
This is all so mind-blowing. I can't wait to see what other discoveries come out of this research. But before we get too carried away, let's take a step back and think about the ethical considerations that come with this kind of knowledge. If we have the ability to manipulate these genes, what are the potential risks and benefits? Who gets to decide who has access to these treatments?
Those are all critical questions, and they highlight the importance of having open and honest conversations about the ethical implications of scientific advancements.
Absolutely. We need to ensure that any new technologies are used responsibly and equitably. Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground in part 2 of our deep dives. I'm eager to hear more about the next steps in this research and what the future holds for obesity treatment.
Let's dive into that in part 3.
Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back with the final part of our deep dive. All right, we are back for the final part of our deep dive into this groundbreaking research on genes and obesity.
It's a wild ride.
It has. We've gone from fat being just like this, storage unit to uncovering these Fantastic Four genes.
Yeah.
That could be these key players in this whole obesity puzzle.
Absolutely.
So what are the next steps for this research? Where do we go from here?
Well, the most immediate next step is to confirm these findings in humans.
Right, because remember, all this was done in mice.
Exactly. Yeah, we got to see if those same genes are behaving the same way in people.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. So how do they even go about doing that?
Well, the researchers are already collaborating with a bariatric surgeon.
Oh, wow.
At Christiana Care.
Okay.
To study gene expression in human adipose tissue.
So they're going to be looking at samples from patients who are undergoing weight loss surgery.
Exactly. Yeah, that gives them access to the tissue they need to study.
Makes sense. So what if they do find that these genes are also implicated in human obesity? Then what?
Well, that's when things get really exciting.
Okay.
If these findings hold true in humans, it opens up a whole world of possibilities for developing new treatments.
Right. We talked about, personalized medicine, tailoring treatments to an individual's genetic makeup.
Right.
But what could that actually look like in practice?
Well, imagine a future where you go to the doctor and they run a simple genetic test.
Okay.
To see which of these Fantastic Four genes are most active in your body.
I like it. Okay, so let's say the test reveals that my gene number 3, the one involved in inflammation,
right,
is highly active. What could my doctor do with that information?
Well, based on that knowledge, they could prescribe a medication that specifically targets that gene, dampening its activity and reducing inflammation in your fat tissue.
So instead of just treating the symptoms of obesity,
right,
we're actually addressing like the underlying genetic factors that are contributing to the problem.
Exactly. We're getting to the root cause, and that's just one example. There are other possibilities too, like gene therapy.
Oh, right, gene therapy. We talked about that earlier, but remind me, how would gene therapy even work in this context?
Well, gene therapy involves modifying genes directly, either by replacing faulty genes with healthy ones, or by introducing new genes that can counteract the effects of the problematic ones.
So in theory, they could use gene therapy to like fix those fantastic 4 genes that are contributing to obesity.
That's the idea. It's still very early days for gene therapy, but it holds immense potential for treating a wide range of diseases, including obesity.
That is amazing. But I gotta admit, it also makes me a little nervous.
Yeah.
Messing with our genes sounds kind of risky. What are the potential downsides?
Well, you're right to be cautious. Gene therapy is still a relatively new technology, and there are definitely risks involved. One concern is that we don't fully understand the long-term consequences of altering our genes.
So there could be like unintended side effects that we don't even know about yet.
That's always a possibility with any new medical treatment.
Right, of course.
But that's why it's so important that this research is conducted rigorously and ethically.
Yeah, and it's also why we need to have these conversations about the potential implications of this technology. We need to think carefully about the risks and benefits before we just start, tinkering with their genes.
Absolutely. We need to be cautious, but also optimistic. Gene therapy holds incredible promise for treating diseases that were once considered incurable.
It's a delicate balance, for sure. Okay, so we've talked a lot about, potential treatments.
Right.
But what about prevention? Could this research lead to ways to prevent obesity from developing in the first place?
That's a really important question, and the answer is potentially yes.
Yeah.
If we can identify individuals who are genetically predisposed to obesity, we might be able to intervene early on with lifestyle modifications or even medications to reduce their risk.
So imagine a world where babies get screened for these fantastic 4 genes.
Yeah.
And if they're found to be at high risk, they're given personalized guidance on diet and exercise from a young age. That would be amazing.
It could be a real game changer, but again, we need to be thoughtful about how we use this information.
Right.
We don't want to create a society where people are stigmatized or discriminated against based on their genes.
Absolutely. Genetic information is incredibly personal, and we need to be very careful about how it's used.
I agree, but despite all the ethical complexities, I think we can all agree that this research is incredibly exciting.
Oh, for sure.
It's giving us a deeper understanding of the intricate mechanisms that contribute to obesity, and it's opening up new avenues for prevention and treatment that were once unimaginable.
Yeah, it truly feels like we're on the cusp of a revolution in healthcare. One that's driven by a deeper understanding of our individual biology.
And it's all thanks to the tireless efforts of researchers who are pushing the boundaries of scientific knowledge.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I think the key takeaway is that obesity is a complex disease, with both genetic and environmental factors at play. And while there's no quick fix, this research gives us hope that we're moving towards more personalized and effective solutions.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining me on this incredible journey into the world of genes and obesity.
It's been a pleasure.
I have a feeling we'll be hearing a lot more about this research in the years to come.
I think you're right. This is just the beginning.
And that's what makes it all the more exciting. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those questions coming.